All right, so Rosann Kent earned her master's degree in reading and storytelling from East Tennessee State University. She lives near Dahlonega, Georgia, on a cabin near Clay Creek, and has directed Appalachian Studies Center at the University of North Georgia since 2012. She enjoys telling stories about her Appalachian ancestors. Some of the stories may even be true. I think I was so excited about that last line that I stumbled on reading her introduction. I love that. Some of the stories may even be true. Thank you, Rosann, for agreeing to be with us here today, especially at this busy time in the semester.
Glad you have me. I think it's good to get to see everybody before that retirement date, which is looming.
Yes, we're glad to be able to see you, and that virtual technology allows all of us who are spread about to connect and hear some of the stuff you have to share. So we did have some questions prepared, and we had some particular interests that we want all. There's some comments there. We're going to miss you, Rosann, in the chat. Keep an eye on that. We did have some specific focus that we want to hear, some of the work that you've done over the years at UNG. But if you could start off by telling us how you became interested in the field of Appalachian studies.
Wow, that's a long meandering story, like they all are. But before coming to the university, I worked and helped to found a tiny micro enterprise firm that was funded by the Appalachian Regional Commission. And the ARC then went on to fund a lot of the early center's work, but we made loans, tiny little loans, to people who wouldn't ordinarily be able to get loans. And the director of that organization said, we really need to get out and meet this community. I hear this faculty at was North Georgia College and State University at that time. They're calling some community meetings, and this is real unusual because a university never asks people what they think. So go find out what they're doing. So I didn't want to go that night. I had whatever else to do. But I went, and I was so impressed by the response to the community, that this was one of 6 meetings that were being held across North Georgia by Dr. Alice Sampson from the College of Education. And basically she was asking the community, there's such a thing as Appalachian Studies Center. If we had one, what would you want it to be? And she was taking in that information. I think she went to 4 counties. So that's how I met her. And then at another time, of course, Alice recruits everyone immediately. If you're on the call, Alice, you resembled that remark. And she had recruited people to clean out this place called the historic Vickery House that the club in town, the Dahlonega Club, had given to the university for a place for the Appalachian Studies Center. So I went over on, and when I stepped on the back porch of that Vickery House, I was hooked. I said, I don't know how, but I'm going to work here. The groundhogs were hiding that day. Haley, I might have thought twice if I'd known how many groundhogs there were, the infestations of that place. So I came there on a 6-month grant with the assurance to the dean, who was then Dr. Bob Michaels, that I would raise my salary for the next year. And I did, and I did that for a couple of years, and finally I went to him and I said, hey, you need to hire me because I'm here. And it was about that time that Dr. Barry Whittemore came along. Barry, are you on here? You taught one of the early classes in Appalachian Studies. When I first came there was no minor in Appalachian Studies. A lot of community involvement, because the idea, the Dahlonega Club wanted a place where the community and the campus could meet and not feel, where the community could feel at home. Because there's some places on campus where they don't feel at home, or they don't know what is the entry point for the campus. How can I go talk to a professor at a campus about a project? So that was the then provost and then President Potter's vision for that. And I think we've lived out their vision, and that the food pantry is there now. Yeah, Barry's saying he taught the first Appalachian history class in 2011. So Barry was teaching before we even had the Appalachian Studies minor, which didn't come until 2012. So, and another early faculty member was Dr. Chris Dockery, who was the Appalachian Teaching Fellow for about 5 years, beginning in 2012. So yeah, that's kind of how I got there. Is just totally unexpected. Totally unexpected.
So Rosann, I think we're going to do some round robin questions. So I've got the next one.
Okay.
So I know Appalachia can kind of be a nebulous concept that means a lot of different things to different people. So personally, how would you define Appalachian studies? And are there particular scholars or thinkers or activists that have helped sharpen your personal definition?
If we were in person, I would turn you over to Barry Whittemore right now and let him answer that. I mean, that is the question, isn't it? Not just what is Appalachia, but where is it and who is it? And as Barry's often said, when is it? Are you talking about pre-industrial Appalachia? You're talking about Appalachia now? You're talking about Appalachia of the 1960s? All those are very different Appalachias. And I also think the most important question when we're defining Appalachia is to ask, and who gets to say? Does the government get to say? Does the Appalachian Trail folks, do they get to say? I mean, who gets to say where is this place called Appalachia? And others might say, is it a place at all? Is it a construct? So that's what we spend the entire 16 weeks unpacking in Introduction to Appalachia. We totally do. I mean, that's how complicated a question is. Very, very complicated. If Appalachia had a Facebook status, it would be, it's complicated. So I can tell you some things that I believe Appalachia is not. It is not monolithic. It is not one long Georgia to New York place where everyone within that would say, I'm Appalachian. Some folks say, my father, for example, who was from Jackson and Hall County and that area north, that corridor up to Rabun County, he did not identify as Appalachian. He said Appalachian was that place where I worked. He would say, I am from Jackson County. I was born between this church and that church. And when we did our seed gathering project, our heirloom seed project, and interviewed elders in our own county, we used the research question, what is the state of heirloom seed saving in Lumpkin County? We discovered that they also didn't identify as Appalachian. They were identifying as these tiny little places. You know, what is Nimberville? What is Yahula? Towns Creek. Those, what might have one time been militia districts back in the day, that it was highly localized. And you can make a case that Appalachia is a put upon name, that someone else put that upon us from the very time that, you know, somewhere when and Apalachicola, when the conquistador said, where's gold? And the natives pointed up, away from us in Appalachia. So yeah, there's a really good article. Barry, is it Curtis Wall or is it David Wall who wrote that article looking at Appalachia? I can send that to you, but there's a is an old article, but it's great. And then it looks at all the various ways we can define Appalachia. I tend to look, there's a lot of theories or lenses that we can look through Appalachia. We can see Appalachia as all poor. We can see Appalachia as all anything. But the one that I tend to use is Barry's model, which is the internal colonial model. You know, what if for the United States? So our our coal, our gold, our, some say now even our water, that all the resources that are being pulled out to Appalachia and have been pulled out, and it's part of our history. So what does that mean when we colonialize something? What can we do to those people to make it okay? Timber, thank you. Definitely in Southern Appalachia. You know, we can otherize them. I'm going to quote a lot on that because I've learned a lot on him. And he said he didn't say this, but I know he said it because he was standing in my classroom. And he said, whether you demonize Appalachians or romanticize Appalachia, either way you otherize them. And when you make someone other, different from you, you can pretty much do what you want to them, right? So if you're interested in the different theoretical frameworks, just Google them. They're all out there. Some I can get with and some I can't, but this is the one that this certainly fits my own frame of reference. Does that answer your question, Teresa? Not really, but you don't have 16 weeks.
Well, yes, that's what I was going to say. For a summary, that was wonderful. Thank you.
Actually, this is not the question that I was supposed to ask next, but as just a brief follow-up, Rosann, when you talked about that local, the kind of local approach or the way that people define themselves locally, is that why in your intro you talk about where you name where you live?
Yes. Yes. Because when I'm talking with folks, Jeremy, yes. Yeah, Jeremy, you were right there in the early days helping us figure all this out, and local places and local people, and if that they're just going, they're disappearing. So I say, yes, in Central Appalachia, we have mountaintop removal, but here in Southern Appalachia, we have death by a million cuts. And I mean, I don't think I made up that. I can't cite where I heard that, but every time there's a new subdivision that comes in, every time there's a new dollar store that comes in, every time there's in a retirement, people move and cut a little piece of the mountain. I'm one of them. I'll cut a little piece of the forest. So sometimes people here say there's been heres and there's come heres. And if you're not a been here, then you're never going to be a been here. I can have a little bit of street cred because I can have an argument as to whether it was your great uncle or my great uncle who bit off another great uncle's ear in Jackson and Hall County in a fight. But I am not from or of Lumpkin County. A little bit of street cred, not much. So yeah, been here's and come here's, and that was the whole purpose of having the Vickery House in the center, to make a place where those two groups could come together and ask questions about what does the community want? Not what we thought they wanted, but what they said they wanted. And listen and to respond to those long-term reciprocal partnerships that take way more than a semester to do.
Thank you. And maybe this is a good segue to the next question, because we wanted to ask you to talk about some of your projects, the big projects you worked on since you have been at that study center at UNG. And in particular, we noted that you've worked to center the stories of Black communities in North Georgia. So could you describe some of that work that you've done for that project, and if you feel relevant for any of the other projects, big projects you've worked on?
Sure. We've really only had maybe 3 big projects at the center since I've been there. Before I became director, Dr. Sampson had helped to start Pick and Bow Music. It was a roots after school music program for children, and that has since become its own 501c3, which is super successful. That if a particular university starts something, and then it becomes its own thing. our second one was the one that Dr. Chris Dockery worked on, and also with Carrie Ann Ferdowski, who had started a seed saving project, an heirloom seed saving project. She realized before seed saving was even cool and the thing by the come here's, she realized that what a jewel we had in our seeds. And this is a fact that I did not make up. I can give you the citation for this next fact. And the fact is that there's more agrobiodiversity in central and southern Appalachia than there is in the rest of the United States, Canada, and northern Mexico. That means we got a lot of old seeds. We got a lot of old apple trees. We got a lot of old herbs that are still here. And so that was our first research question, because we're in such a agrobiodiverse area. What was the state? What was the state of that? And Carrie Ann had already had the seed bank. And so we began to go out and interview elders, to ask elders to come to the Vickery House to help us in the demonstration garden, to go into their farms and fields and living rooms and farmers markets. So that was just a fabulous 5 years. The biology, who's always been water carriers on that project, is continuing. I just got a note on the GroupMe for a work day led by Dr. David Patterson there. So we've enlarged it tremendously from just the early days when we were gathering heirloom seeds to growing food for Lumpkin County lunchrooms, especially the summer feeding program there. And the food pantry came along in all that, and the hoop house, that seasonal extension high tunnel came along during all that. And so Haley, a lot of you that I see, you were very much a part of putting in the infrastructure and raising money for the infrastructure, because here's the thing, we're not funded. The only thing that's funded at the center is my position, and that's now gone. So how will this work continue? I hope the work continues. And so I think we've got our gardening, our these precious agro biodiversity resources. What I'm a little concerned about is the next one, and that's the Mount Hope Cemetery Preservation Project. That's our most recent one that we started about 4 years ago. Our community partner in that is the Lumpkin County Historical Society and the Dahlonega Cemetery Committee. That's an advisory committee to City Hall. There's no voting rights, but we tried to create this community model, and Dr. Chris Dockery can tell you a lot about this, not so that students become warm bodies to go cook hot dogs or go or go make a brochure. I mean, all those things can be important, but how can we make some really long-term change? And what the city needed is that they needed just help in making that Mount Hope not an eyesore. It was pretty grown up. What I didn't realize is that the city owns the common areas, but in our municipal cemetery, I don't know about others, private plots are exactly that, private plots. So when people get older or when people move away, there's nobody to maintain those private plots. We also knew that we had a lot of unmarked graves. We could tell by the divots after it would snow or after the wind would blow. We would go and say, oh yeah, grave, grave, grave. We had a community volunteer, Jack Anthony. He flew his drone over it on a beautiful sunshiny day, and you could literally see the greener rectangles. So we knew that there were a lot of unmarked burials over there. We knew that there was an old African-American section, the segregated section, that really, it looked empty. You didn't need to wait until a snowy day or look at the drone footage for that, you could just see that it looked empty. And so we began to, the first thing we did, we had a farmer from the next county over. He came over and did dowsing. And he said, oh, there are hundreds of graves here. And I was like, okay. And so then the city came out. We did get a grant to do it with GPS, but I'm about to retire, so I can say this. Some people in certain places at the university didn't want us playing with their toys, the boy toys. So we were not allowed to use that ground penetrating radar, but the city stepped up and did it. And just in a half an acre, there are almost 300 unmarked African-American graves. 300. And then looking back at David Williams' work, who wrote the first article that I know about, Georgia's Forgotten Miners, the enslaved people who were used in the mining. He's one of the few that have written about that, as our very own Dr. Jennifer Lund Smith, who passed. She wrote about Reconstruction era. And if you've not read the articles, my goodness, that's seminal. You got to read it. Negotiating the Terms of Freedom by Dr. Smith, and Georgia's Forgotten Miners by Dr. David Williams. So we began to wonder, the city did buy little markers that said unmarked, and students participated in marking those graves in what was probably one of the most spiritual moments I've had in my teaching career. They showed up from everywhere. I don't know how and where all these students came from. They were not my students. A lot of them were honor students. Some were just previous students. Some were students who'd heard about it. And they had laid the tools, the hammers and the little steel plaques. And when they started, it was in unison. And there was something about a long line of little white kids kneeling over and then moving to the next one, and then moving to the next one, and moving to the next one. It was profound. Tears were shed that we didn't know these people's names. We had some ideas about family names because there's staff who work at UNG who have always lived in Dahlonega. So they were able to say, yeah, that's my grandmother. That's my great granddaddy. That's my step great granddaddy. And so we started looking at proximity in cemeteries, but we also started looking, trying to break the 1870 wall. So if you're African-American and tracing your family history, 1870 is usually, that census is usually the first time that you're listed by name. There's some other circumstances, but how could we break the 1870 wall using our primary source documents to see who might be buried in that cemetery? So we looked at Freedmen's Bureau records, because Price Memorial was once a Freedmen's record bureau. It was also once a school for their children. And W.P. Price pretty much said, yeah, we'll build you a new school, but you have to sign and promise that you or your descendants will never come back. I don't think we're telling that in our sesquis and whatever. Yeah. So a lot of deep racist history at our school that hasn't been confronted or has been spoken about in terms like, oh, well, they were men of their times. It's painful. And so another book I recommend is by Andrew Denson from Western North Carolina, The Monument to Absence. And basically he says, Southerners can talk about the Cherokee with fondness, and they can have, Trail of Tears markers, and they can have the little villages and blah, 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 because you could be kinder to people after you've disappeared them. And at the same time, they were starting this emphasis on the Trail of Tears, they, meaning Georgia. Yeah, it is fantastic. I read it every once in a while, Jeremy, just because I should. That and Jonathan Sarris's book, A Separate Civil War, that's another one of my go-to. But it was written during the Jim Crow period, and not it was written, but all of these monuments started occurring during the Jim Crow period. So on one hand, you're making these very restrictive laws, and on the other, you're commemorating people. So how do Southerners hold that cognitive dissonance? It really make you think deeply. The reaction when students find out about that, when they know when they stand near Price Memorial and they learn about Richard, or they learn about Edmund, and they were two brick makers who ran away, and they read that enslaved people's ad, they get angry. It's like, well, why aren't their names on a brick? It's like, yeah, why aren't their names on a brick? So if you really want to do something for me, you can put Richard and Edmund and 1838 on a brick. Put it over there. And those are the people that I want to remember. What happened to Richard? What happened to Edmund? So there is an African American community in Dahlonega. And in Lumpkin County, a very thriving community. And Haley, thank you for connecting me to that, and just laying the groundwork. And that they have a wonderful story to tell, and their story interacts with the Cherokee story, because about 1908, if you had Cherokee heritage, you could apply to get money. It was in a settlement. So we have a lot of African-American people from Dahlonega applying. And what they write is oh, well, this is who owned us. And this is who owned us for that. And I claim Cherokee through my mother of the Owl clan, or I claim Cherokee through my grandfather's people in North Carolina through the Bird clan. So those are the type of records that we started looking at. So any of you who teach writing or teach research or teach history, there is so much untold history that comes out of those primary source documents. So we looked at tax records. We were able to tell which African-American man was one of the first to own property. He is buried at Mount Hope. So now what we'd like to do is eventually see a signage, a memorial, written in conjunction with the community, with some family names and a little bit about history of building the town. There's an amazing African-American entrepreneur who, he's not buried there, but his descendants are, and his descendants are still in this town. I mean, he's like a movie. This man is a movie. He was a former slave. When he was emancipated, he came here. He started an ice house. He started a pie shop. He eventually bought a gold mine through his white guardian. Oh, we also, a student right now is transcribing the records when a free person of color, the free was a little iffy. You had to go and register. You had to have a white person to do any property transactions, and you had to pay, and you had to do this every year. You had to prove that you were free. So this man was so wealthy that he bankrolled people a boat to go to California in the 49ers, a 29 gold miner, and then a 49er in California. So what is that story? man, it's like somebody, if you got anything, people with producers, y'all just check on that one, because that's a good one. So to go from a pie stand and an ice house to take 50 men with you. By the way, the same community partner, Chris Warwick, has written a small book on that. So there are people in town that know about this. They are not scholars in the sense of credential scholars, but they have certainly paid their dues in reading and research. And Chris is really looking for partnerships. We have a lot of physical stuff in the cemetery, and Chris does an awesome job of teaching with the students and teaching through experience. He's made all kind of scavenger hunts in the cemetery. He teaches about cemetery symbolism, so it's also a good art class. I would highly, that's what I hope, is that somebody else can latch onto Chris, and that this work in the cemetery can continue, and that this African American section can get marked. But I mean, it looks better than it did, but still the story isn't told in a large visual way. Another student did put QR codes up this time, and she did put a QR code there for Isaac Rucker, who was a U.S. colored troops who escaped with two brothers and went to Knoxville and enlisted in heavy artillery and came back. He came back after the war. So that's another story to be told. So yeah, I could go on and on and on, y'all. This is good stuff. I really hope that if you're looking for, Chris is looking for somebody on certain times of the year to show up and help pick up trash. That's easy. He's looking for people who can take a section of the cemetery and really clean it. And we've done tutorials, and yes, he is. I visit Isaac Rucker every Friday, which is where I go and sit and review with him what I found. But you can also just go higher and higher up Bloom's taxonomy to say, I really like this headstone. I'm going to find out everything I can find out about this person, this headstone. How does this headstone compare with the others? What's the story there? Why are all these children buried here? One class even discovered the letters to old Bostwick Hall that had been buried in the cemetery. What was that about? So yeah, there's just every semester there's a new mystery. And I've seen students get more excited about that. They're pretty excited about the seeds, but at first cemetery work can be a bit odd to them. And then once they relax into it and start to see the stories that come out of it, they get pretty fascinated by it.
Rosann, you mentioned free gym earlier, and so we have somebody at the university who traces her lineage back to him. I don't know if you know Valerie Green.
Yes. Yes. Lots
Yes.
and lots of talk with Valerie Green and introductions through her to Hickory Grove. Hickory Grove is a church on the edge of the county. That's actually the area where the Rucker brothers lived. We don't know that the Ruckers were their real name because we can't find anybody else by the name of Rucker, and they could have chosen any name they wanted when they enlisted. So that, yeah, there's so many mysteries there.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And so you've spoken a lot about storytelling as a method that we can use to highlight the stories of people whose history have been brushed under the carpet, and to honor their descendants who are still in Dahlonega today. And I was wondering if you could expand on that and if in your opinion, how do you think that UNG can better serve Black and Indigenous communities in our service area?
We'll talk with them to start with, figure a way to build relationships to them. We have the Vickery House, come over for, make a potluck, make a lunch sandwich, you know, just start in the way that you would meet any other human being, and get to know each other, and have in our models, in our seed keeping model, we learned, you know, not to go directly to the seed keeper. We learned to find somebody who knew that seed keeper and could introduce them to them. And you got that with Valerie. And you got that with Haley. And Valerie, I think, is now comfortable. I don't know if you're on here, Valerie. Hey, we've had so many wonderful talks over the times, and her knowledge of history is so deep. And I just love to, envision this going down the Vickery House, just this huge family history chart with all of her people's names on it and how those families connect, because Valerie's story and her husband's story, they tell the story. So, you know, it's like, when is Appalachia? We're back to that. Well, hey, Valerie and her family's still here. That when is now? When is now? And so that does so much to have that conversation or have that story be well known, because that helps disabuse the myth of there are no African Americans in Appalachia. There were no slaves in Appalachia. I can feel Barry and Jeremy rolling their eyes. Anywhere there's people, there's slaves. Yeah. And so what was life like for them? And what is that legacy like now? And that is where that's where the truth talking to power comes in, because it's one thing to talk about way back in the day, but what is happening now that is a legacy that's left over from that? Because if you're erased, if you're not even here, if you're otherized, what does that mean? What does that mean about your property? What does that mean about your history? What does that mean about your neighborhood? There's a really good, you asked me who influenced me. One of my influences is the Slave Cabin Project, where this man goes around and sleeps in slave cabins. And he, because he says, you know, the big white house is here, but the other house isn't, because they weren't built to stay. And he is, I really enjoy his approach to make it real. There's something about that, you know, if you're camping or if you're watching a performance there. Barry and I went to one years and years ago. It makes that story more powerful. Valerie, you want to say anything?
Oh.
Am I going to scare you if I call on you?
I don't think her mic is working. She just walked over here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Valerie
Hello.
Green, everybody.
Look, hey! I'm so glad to see you.
Yeah, same here, Rosann. How you been?
I've been okay.
Okay, I've been kind of listening in. I jumped in kind of late, so
Yeah.
yeah. But yes, it's an honor to have gotten to know you, and just you've told me so much about my history here in this town. So I'm very thankful for that, and I look forward to just learning more and doing more, getting more involved. So I don't even know where to start. You and Chris have given me so much information, and I've kind of passed a lot of it on to my brother and my sister. So we've been doing some research, but hardly doesn't compare to what you've given us. So I just look forward to trying to keep, working with Chris, and hate to see you go, but I'll keep in touch with you. And just keep doing more, like you have told, you spoke about Jim, Free Jim being he's my third great uncle removed. So it's not that far. It seems far, but it's really not that far away.
That's right.
Us. So we're thankful to know him, and we want to, try to get more information and just keep digging for as not just our family, but like I said, the African American history here in this town, because it's really deep, and it's really, it's impressive what you guys have found for us. So.
And thank you for just being willing to build that relationship. I mean, I think I said earlier, it's hard to do these reciprocal community projects in a semester.
Yeah.
If we had ended on our first semester with a crazy student, that would have been bad. We just had a student who went rogue and didn't follow instructions.
Right.
And Haley was the one who said, "Hey, we need to talk." So that's why these community projects, you step outside the classroom, you step out of the little world in which you're contained, and it immediately becomes political. It immediately becomes in the present with wants and desires and greed and ambition that you have no idea about. You have no idea what's behind that, and you can really step in it. And buddy, there's some days I longed for multiple choice.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about your labor statement you're going to write. And I was looking at other universities, and they said that the labor statement can be harder to write than the land statement. Because we cannot, like you said, Melissa, oh yeah, we're Cherokee, we're Creek, we're whatever. But what about the people who built our streets, our churches? What about the bricks that were torn down in front of the courthouse when it was remodeled, built by enslaved people, that Chris took home and then brings back to the cemetery? So when we stabilize some of the headstones in the African American cemetery part, we put them there. What about documenting those very bricks? I mean, this African Americans made this town work. They made our country work. So I look forward to seeing that statement being developed and written, and then something at the cemetery, Valerie, so that people can visit. The QR code will tell us about Isaac. The QR code will tell us about the unmarked people in general. But, every time I call out a name, you say, yep, he's mine, that name's mine, that name's mine. So it's a wonderful backstory of stories. And, sometimes the white and enslaved families had the same names, and sometimes they didn't. So parsing that out is a little bit tricky too. But I think the records are there. I think we just got to look for them.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's I'm just, as you're talking, y'all are talking, I'm struck by how there's been such a big push, and I think it's a very important push, of course, to have students have a global mindset. This is very, very important. But at the same time, this very micro mindset is also really important. What I hear you telling me is that we need to have both, and probably they both complement one another, right? How can you understand the global perspective if you don't understand your very local perspective, your local history?
Yeah, and how Dahlonega has a lat long Dahlonega exists on the globe. And so I really take issue with, this is gonna hurt somebody's feelings, I don't care. With the international push, with the global push, we are on this globe. Appalachia is on this globe. As Silas House, a very well-known novelist and writer, says, Appalachia is not nowhere. And a lot of times it gets treated by our institutions like nowhere, or it gets treated with a little bit of shame. So off is always a lot more glitzier. And that's a deep problem with folks that have been in this town forever, with the been here's, both Black and white, because they sense that they sense that. I don't know what is there a word for. Jeremy, what is that word that local people can feel a little bit put down, or a little bit, I mean, it's within living memory that people that couldn't come to school here were called dirty feets and cadets. Those were the two.
Quite a few words for it. So again, dirty feet, that would have been my mother's time when she came in, because Newton Oaks was a dirt parking lot. And so if you were a commuter, you're local, you tracked mud in, so you were called dirty feet. I mean, nugget is the more appropriate one now, I guess you could say. But when I was going to school, there was a drunkard that got into a fight with a college student that was what would be considered a nugget, called him a creek donkey. And so that became the term for a while.
Whoa. Whoa. Yeah.
I go by local, yokel, lumpkin, bumpkin. I can speak fluent Dahlonegese if you need me to, but that's about what I would say as far as my own self-identities.
Yeah. And Jeremy, how old are you?
I just turned 31.
You can't be. I think that's a lie right there.
Probably.
Because I was meeting you 10 years ago.
I know.
That's gone by fast.
It has. It has.
So I think, I think that, again, when is Appalachia? Is Appalachia the time of the dirty feet, or the creek donkey, or the local yokel? Yeah, it is so complicated. No wonder Facebook took that option off. The complicated issue was complicated. And I think what that's why we used to have so many potlucks, both over at the center, at the porch, and in our homes, because Chris Dockery would say that we need potluck pedagogy. We need where we sit down over something, even if it's just, elders would bring in biscuits and sorghum, or one time they did bring in some white lightning, and I said, no, we can't have that. And they said, well, it's legal. My daughter made me go legit. I said, we still can't have it. So have something that is legal, and just talk like humans do. Go to one another's houses, and it just takes a long time to build trust, a long time. And, as faculty, we can say, this is our project. We're going to design it. We got that up a degree. When here it is, chop, chop. And the community might say, just a minute now. You might even know what it is that they feel uncomfortable about. It just may be because you designed their project. It may be because what are you going to do with this information? How are you going to profit from this information? How can we share in that information? Who's going to own that picture you want from me?
Actually, that dovetails really well with the other question, the next question on the list. You mentioned that there's an initiative at the university to write a land and labor acknowledgement statement as a jumping off point to creating, I think, more sustained and meaningful engagement with the community, or various communities in our areas, because we're a very spread out university. So what pitfalls or obstacles or ethical issues do you think we should have in mind at the university as we continue to do this work?
Well, we all know that every community is different. I mean, every campus, Blue Ridge is very different. They're eat up with mover inners. And finding local people there is even harder than finding local people here, which is already hard. I can't speak to what Hall County is like now. But take some time. Find the gatekeepers. Haley was our gatekeeper to Valerie. Now Valerie is our gatekeeper to your brother, who is our gatekeeper to who knows who he knows in New York. So just find the people that might know the people. That's one of the reasons that we made a seed map of Lumpkin County to make a visual where people can really see these are the districts, these are the people. Oh, I recognize this person, you know, Mom, Pa, Grindle, Jeremy. You remember when they used to come into the wagon wheel, and this is where they gave their seeds to, and their seeds traveled this way. So when we found that when local people started seeing, we're honoring this work. We're not going to sell your seeds. We're going to show our art in non-art places. We're not going to be highbrow about it. And you can come in this house anytime and buy, and here's where the seeds are, behind this curtain. You can leave some if you want to. So just to make it, it's a lot less formal than is comfortable in most of our academic operations.
We had a question in the chat as well from Terry Easton. He was interested on your thoughts. Without a budget line for a director for the Appalachian Studies Center, how might this work continue? Do you know, is there any possibility for a
I'm going to
line?
kick that one up to my assistant dean and my dean, as they will be the ones that can answer that. I have no idea. I hope that the work goes on with people on this call. Whether the center goes on or not, I don't know. But I know that the biology department and our community partner, Lumpkin County Schools, and I think 4-H is a part of that partnership, as is the Extension Service, and as is Blairsville. The Extension Station in Blairsville. There's a really good partnership going on there. So that work's going to continue. That work is going to be just like that Pick and Bow Music School. It's going to go right on. Food's going to be produced. Seeds are going to be saved. Stuff's going to get done. This project with the Mount Hope, specifically the African American section of Mount Hope, this is the one I worry about. So Terry, I can't speak to whether the center will exist or not. There is a deed of gift. There is a condition in the deed of gift that says the Vickery House must be used for history gatherings, community, Lumpkin County, or it goes back to its heirs. So I don't know if that will save anybody. Lawyers can do anything. They could have that taken out. I don't know.
Thank you, Rosann.
Yes, are there any other questions? We only have about 3 minutes left in the hour, but are there any other questions that folks would like to ask? One pops up. We do have one more that we wanted to ask, but Rosann has partially addressed it. Oh, I think Teresa, it's your turn. I was about to ask this question. I think it's your turn to ask the question. Would you like to?
Yeah, for sure. And it actually touches on something, Rosann, that you mentioned right at the top of the talk when you were saying what isn't Appalachia. You mentioned that Appalachia is not a monolith. So we're really interested in hearing from you about when you do hear this idea pop up in the public, if you have like strategies for talking to people about the actual like diversity within Appalachia and how you go about dismantling this myth.
How I do it nicely or how I do it when I'm just done.
Both.
Is two different things. You know, our world is so hard and so crazy that it just gets easy to pack things in a nice containers. And Appalachia, yeah, Barry, thanks. Appalachia is one of those words that is so full of demonizing and romanticizing. Usually if I'm feeling spiritually advanced, I ask probing questions. But what do you think Appalachia is? Is it this? Is it that? Barry, can you speak to that? I want to get his voice on here. I don't know if he's
Say it
done-
again.
Yeah, can you speak to when somebody asks you about how do you disabuse people of the notions as Appalachia is a monolithic, all the same everywhere?
There are so many ways you can do that. It's not even funny. Usually I try to find out what their myth is and bust that first.
Mm-hmm.
If they think, we're all white, then I'll, point out something in music or the fact that the 1860 census had slaves in every county in Appalachia. There's so many ways you can do that.
Or that we're all rural. That's another one.
Yeah, well, my dissertation was on town formation. So
Yeah.
it's like, there is, urban and town history in Appalachia as well. Got some pretty good sized cities.
I like the idea of you find out what their myth is first and then try to bust that.
Yeah, it's I've always enjoyed, sort of stomping on landmines, watching them blow up. It can be really useful, although it ticks some people off. I've gotten in trouble for that before, especially when I was in the church.
I bet. Hey, Amy, I wanted to ask you how you see Appalachia as different than where you grew up. I mean, you've spoken on that about how different Dahlonega is from where you were at App State.
Hey, Rosann, you're very kind to call on me.
Well, I mean, different, if we want to talk
Yeah.
about a non-monolithic, you can talk about that because you were at a different place.
Sure. And I think the struggle that you and I have probably spoke to before is the appreciation at Appalachian State for the culture, for the region, that really kind of threw me when I came here initially. Of course, I've been here 13 years now. And there was this community and this, it was like it was infiltrated within the college in and of itself.
Yeah.
And I know Rosann and I over the years have had those conversations of why isn't it infiltrated in the same way here? Is it the military emphasis? Is it, some other piece that defines UNG in a way that keeps them from really grabbing that identity of Appalachian and the Appalachian Studies Center in and of itself. And I think my hope had been to see it become more of a part of the culture of the college in the way that I experienced it at App State. But it seems like it's just like there's this struggle to really latch onto it and build that value to it in the same way. Is that where you were going, Rosann?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and growing up in that area, of North Carolina, in the foothills of North Carolina, we would have field trips to the Appalachian Studies Center and learn about the history of that area. And, I think that would be a lovely piece, because it was really through that I started kind of recognizing that identity in and of myself. But beyond that, I will say right here publicly that it's really you, Rosann, that really helped me build that own appreciation of being from that culture, that region, that I don't know that I really fully appreciated until I met you and have had great conversations. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, it looks like we are just past the hour. I want to be, kind of aware of Rosann's chime, but if there are any other questions or folks want to stay on, we could do that. Just in general, thank you so much, Rosann, for sharing this part, for all the work you've done in general. Feels weird to call it work. I know it's your job, but it feels more than that, or different from that. So I don't know quite the right word to say, but thank you for in many ways setting the stage for what we'd like to see UNG embrace. And I love hearing from all sorts of people that I don't get to see because I'm on a different campus. So
Yeah.
Thank you for helping to create that network, that connection.
And I just keep thinking of all kind of things I want to say. And one more is Dr. Yi Ding. I mean, she teaches philosophy, and we've had some great programs and learning opportunities together. And her students always excite me and come up with things that I never would have thought about. So I guess if I could leave you with the parting shot, is think way beyond the disciplines.
Yeah.
This thing, okay, philosophy and Appalachian studies, but when you boil it down to, Appalachia's got water, soil, resources, hunger. they've got things everybody else has. There's a way that you can fit in whatever it is that you're studying or that you want to get across through that lens of Appalachia. And I think you was the queen of doing that.